everyone. I'd like to call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember DeBala.
Here.
Councilmember Kostick.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
Here.
All right, great. We're all here this evening, and we're going to turn it over now to our city manager for our second budget work session. And so, Ms. Ludlow, why don't you take it away?
Thank you very much. Glad we're here for the second budget work session. Before we get into the capital improvement program, I'd like to go over a few kind of background pieces of information about the budget that I think there's been some confusion over. I've seen some listeners' postings that indicate some uncertainty or unfamiliarity with the budget processes. So I'd just like to go through these first, and then I'll have the information posted so it's available. One of the questions and areas of confusion has to do with the fact that people think money is just sitting in a pot that gets carried over, but all budget appropriations expire on June 30th, and then budget appropriations for the next fiscal year go into place on July 1. Funds that weren't spent on June 30th go into the unassigned reserve, and they are used to populate the account lines that become active on July 1 pursuant to the adopted budget. So for FY20, all of our accounts will zero out on at midnight on June 30, and then they will be going into the accounts that the council chooses them to go into through the budget that it gets adopted on July 1. Funds that are left over after this appropriation remain in the unassigned reserve. And there's only a few exceptions to this. Some are funds that have been placed into a special reserve fund, such as the equipment replacement reserve or the housing reserve, or those items that have been encumbered to pay a bill. And the bills need to be paid by August 1st for services or purchases from the previous fiscal year. The emergency reserve and the contingency fund do not carry over, so they don't kind of multiply in place. They are reappropriated each year at the appropriate amount as specified in the charter. And those numbers and how that's done is checked by our auditors every year. The city is not sitting on large reserve funds, nor is it in the red. The city operates under a balanced budget requirement. The city has chosen to utilize the available unassigned fund balance to subsidize the operating budget. In subsequent years, this will be shown as an appropriation to more clearly show that the city has a balanced budget. I meant to do it this year. It was a little, we had an unusual year, and so I did not adequately show that clearly in the document. There is something called the bond reserve. The bond reserve funds will be released to the unassigned fund balance as the library bond funds are spent on the library project. And that's important when we talk about the unassigned general fund balance. The unassigned general fund balance is $1,848,058, and that does not meet the city council's policy to have this fund balance be at least 17% of the general fund operating revenues. Instead, that amount should be about $4.6 million. To meet that criteria, either additional funds can be directed to the unassigned reserve, or $2.75 million can be spent from the library bond during FY21, or a combination of both. If the policy amount is not met, the council is to declare that as part of the budget approval process. City revenue numbers continue to be refined for FY20 and FY21, given the surprises and unanticipated impacts of the pandemic. We've identified that we could lose up to $132,000 in recreation department revenue if the city remains closed for gatherings through the summer. But that revenue would be offset by about $42,000 from not hiring temporary staff for summer camps. So that's a net loss of about $90,000. While major revenue sources are expected to hold steady for the most part for FY20 and 21, there will be a decline in revenues for parking, rentals, space rentals, hotel motel tax, admission and amusement tax, library fines, and passport revenue. We are identifying those amounts. In my view, the most significant revenue, less revenue item does come from Recreation Department revenue. And so that's something that we're looking at all of the accounts, but that's part of what we will be talking about as we go into budget reconciliation. Now I'd like to turn to the capital improvement program. Let's see if I can do this well. All right. Can you see that?
Yes.
Good, okay. So we've had the presentation of the recommended budget. We've gone through a budget work session and the public hearing, first public hearing on the budget. Today we are on the second budget work session on the capital improvement program and some of the small funds. The proposed FY21 budget was mostly prepared before COVID-19, and it was a maintenance of effort budget even before we got hit with the surprises of COVID-19. So there are no new major initiatives or services. That's particularly true for the CIP. The Capital Improvement Program is a 5-year plan for major purchases and projects. Most of the projects are multi-year efforts, or they're regular equipment replacements or infrastructure improvements. We have expenditures from the Equipment Replacement Reserve, unrestricted general fund monies, the special revenue funds, which are grant funds, the speed camera fund, or the stormwater fund. I had this same slide last week.
Yes.
So over the next 4 weeks, the council will be holding, 3 weeks now, the council will be holding work sessions. There have been a number of steps that I've taken to allow for flexibility for the council. Union negotiations were paused, and July 1 staff wage increases were put on hold. As you'll see tonight, capital projects totaling about $1.7 million were postponed until FY22. There were public arts projects were postponed, and some funds that would not be used to because of the pandemic were shifted to minor grants program for small businesses. Some of the budget numbers and impacts are not yet known, but we are finalizing some of that information now. Some of it is not going to be known until we know when we go back to business as usual, which could be many months away. I'd like to note that the city has a well-deserved reputation for fiscal responsibility, and we will continue to follow best practices even in these times of uncertainty. And the proposed budget is crafted to advance the council's priorities. We have a few kind of principles, methods, rules of thumb in looking at the capital budget. First of all, from the nature of these improvements and projects, many of these have been planned for over 5 years. We look at how do we expend these funds, and what funds do they come from that pay for these improvements. One of the major ones is the Equipment Replacement Reserve. It's a savings program where a contribution is made each year to save up for the cost of replacing each vehicle or longer life piece of equipment. This process allows for less variability and expenditures in any particular year. We have tried to do something every year, which is to spend about $500,000 on road construction, $500,000 on new sidewalks, and at least $800,000 in ADA sidewalk retrofits. $300,000 to $500,000 on city street ADA sidewalk retrofits, and $500,000 now on SHA sidewalk retrofits. However, part of the need to be very cautious about funds, we're only doing $100,000 in new sidewalk traffic calming funds for this, is proposed for this FY21 fiscal year, and only $250,000 each in ADA sidewalk retrofits, $250,000 for city sidewalks and $250,000 for SHA sidewalks. I did not cut the $500,000 for road construction because road construction in particular needs to happen each year. A delay in doing road work costs the city much more to do in later years. And then, of course, we have a multi-year list of stormwater projects that is paid for from the Stormwater Fund. The projects help meet state requirements, so they do need to be done. We have a variety of other interesting projects, neighborhood improvements, transportation improvements, economic development improvements, and often they're funded by grant funds. One of the things I wanted to note was that many CIP projects take many years to come to completion. Look at Flower Avenue, look at some of the projects along New Hampshire Avenue. We identify the issue. It may come out of a strategic plan or a master plan. Lots of discussion with the community and the council about what are the priorities for these plans. Staff pursues grant funds. We work with engineers, utility companies, and permitting bodies. We consult again with communities. We consult again with the council as the designs are refined. And then once the projects actually begin, we do the oversight and we do the grant reporting. One of the things that's very frustrating that I know for planners, and I started my career in planning, is that it can take a really long time to actually see something built. But you do need to be planning for this all the time. And while it may seem easy to postpone a capital project, if you slow the project early on, you may not have enough information to actually apply for grant funds or to do some of the, take advantage of an opportunity if utility companies coming in to do something to advance your project. So we try to have a good program that goes for multi-years so we can see how things are going. And if we hear of an activity, a development project or a utility project that we can partner with, we try to take advantage of that. And, you know, infrastructure and streetscape improvements have large advantages and benefits for property owners, and they meet safety, climate change resiliency, and race equity goals. And that's all of these things are a little bit hard to quantify, but they make tremendous difference in livability of the community. I'd like to talk for a minute about the equipment replacement reserve. It's about a $3.9 million fund. It's to pay for the replacement of vehicles and mechanical pieces of equipment once they've exceeded their expected life to get a new one. And funds are contributed each year to ensure that the fund has the funds when the new equipment is needed. And some of the equipment's very expensive. So if we have, and we have in a couple of years, 2 trash trucks due to be replaced, it's a large amount of money to put out. So what we do is we put a portion of the cost for the purchases as part of the contribution every year so that we have adequate funds. And we keep a kind of smooth amount that we donate, that we put into that fund. The total cost for FY21 is $624,000 if we purchase the items that are in the FY21 list. But if you look at the 5-year CIP, and if you average out how much the costs are over that 5-year CIP, it's about $950,000 a year. So I put in only $600,000 as a contribution. It really should be over $800,000 on a long-term way. And I feel very strongly that we should not go below $600,000. I know that there was a proposal that I saw to not do a contribution to the ERR this year. I would strongly advise against lowering anything below $600,000. This is something that I think not putting a contribution, I think, would be fiscally egregious. So I was looking at the last time we didn't put a contribution to the ERR was by a city manager, Rick Finn, many years ago. And it took a very long time for us to get onto good fiscal footing. When I was an acting city manager and preparing my first budget, I had to have a contribution to the ERR of $1.3 million. We were so far out of kilter. And so I feel strongly about this. If there is a desire to cut $600,000 from somewhere else, I will happily work with the council to do so. But I do feel strongly that we should not go below that amount for the ERR contribution. Items that are scheduled to be purchased in FY21 are 4 police cars, field radio equipment, mobile computers, license plate reader, camera and taser replacement for the police department. And I'll have the chief speak to that in just a moment. Also a pickup truck, leaf box, leaf collection vacuum, crack filling machine. I think tire changer is blocked on my screen. For the public works department. Some treadmills and arcade game for the rec department, and we have to see what happens with the large rec bus that was scheduled for this year. For the library, userful computer hardware and software, and then IT oversees our door security and network switches. And at this point, Chief, could you speak just for a moment about the items for the police department?
Absolutely. We have several items that are scheduled in the ERR this year. First are 4 police cars, and these are marked police cars. As we've discussed with the council before, we're transitioning into hybrid vehicle for our marked patrol fleet, and we're attempting to get all electric vehicles for our non-patrol fleet. So all of these vehicles that we're purchasing this year are hybrid vehicles, and they're a lot more costly than the regular gasoline vehicles. I'm gonna give you an example. This year, they were so expensive that we had to forego buying 1 cruiser because of the fact that they were so costly. Instead of going and asking for an additional car, we actually forgoed buying one. We also have field radio equipment, and that's the equipment that the officers use in the field to communicate with the dispatcher. We're due to replace a large bulk of that. We also have mobile computers. Those are the computers that the officers have in their cars that they're able to communicate, run tags, and communicate with the dispatcher and so on and so forth. License plate reader, we are scheduled to replace 2 of our license plate readers that currently the technology just doesn't work. We have them on the cars, but they just don't work. That's important for gathering intelligence. It's also important for traffic enforcement. The body-worn camera replacement, we're scheduled to replace all of our body-worn cameras this year. We're on a 5-year contract with Axon, and it comes up this year. We're trying to negotiate the body-worn cameras with the tasers. They're both one vendor to get a lower price. And as last item is the taser replacement. Like I said, we're due for replacement of the tasers as well. So we're trying to work with Axon to bulk those in together to get a better price for those products. But most of the stuff that you'll see here is stuff that we need for the day-to-day operation of the police department. The only one that may not be essential is the license plate reader, but the rest of them are essential components of what we need, what our officers need on a day-to-day basis to do their job.
One of the things, perhaps Chief, you could speak just for a moment about the vehicle committee that reviews our purchasing.
Absolutely. All the police department vehicles and all of the city vehicles are purchased after review from the vehicle replacement committee. I sit on that committee from the police department, and other department heads sit on that committee as well. It's chaired by the Public Works Director, Ms. Braithwaite. What we do is we look at long-term purchases and long-term needs. There's several factors that grade vehicles out as far as cost for maintenance, as far as replacement, as far as mileage, and so on and so forth. So we're very calculated on how we purchase vehicles. It's not just willy-nilly, we're guessing what we need. We're looking long-term, as far as what the fleet is, but we're also assessing, like I said earlier, the transition to hybrid vehicles, the availability. When we did our review a couple years ago, the hybrid vehicles in a patrol rated capacity were not available. And that's why when we were looking towards allocate the monies several years out, we didn't realize that. So we're always doing a continuous assessment of our needs. Like I said earlier, sometimes we're conservative. I would have liked to have an additional patrol vehicle, but I realized that during these times, it just wasn't going to happen. So what we did is we were trying to repurpose an existing vehicle that we would have deadlined. Obviously safety is paramount, and we felt comfortable that we could have that one vehicle still serviceable.
Thank you. Daryl, I don't know if you want to speak at all about the Public Works Department equipment.
I think all of that is fairly well self-explanatory. Again, like the chief said, these vehicles go through a review process before we select them. And oftentimes when they're up for replacement, we will delay, sometimes by a year, sometimes by more. Each vehicle is, when it's purchased, we have an estimated lifespan that we're working off of. For instance, the pickup truck we're replacing was purchased in 2008, so it's a 13-year-old vehicle. The leaf box and leaf vac we have on a 10-year cycle because of the kind of grit and grime that they encounter during leaf collection process. They really need to be replaced after 10 years. Our crack filling machine will be 18 years old by the time it's replaced. So we have maintained that for a long time. And the truck tire changer is 12 years. Again, it had originally been assumed for a 10-year replacement. We were able to extend it a couple of years.
Thank you. The treadmills and arcade game for the rec department are coming up for replacement. In some respects, they could probably go another year, but it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. So it's something that we can look, there's not a lot of expense to these. So we will look at that, I think, a little more closely to find out if this year makes sense. I know Mr. Clark said that they could go for another year, partly because right now they're not being used. And so we're keeping our eyes on that. Library useful computer hardware and software does need to be replaced, and it's on a regular basis. The door security and network switches upgrade is overseen by information technology. Lars, could you speak to that for a moment?
Yes. It's been a few years since that system has been replaced, and what we're finding, this is the door security system, what we're finding is that the parts are no longer available and the system isn't under support anymore through the manufacturer. So we had an instance last year where we had to wait about 6 months before we could replace one of the doors, and we were on we're on the internet looking for used parts at that point. So there's also some limitations of the door security system. One being that it's not accessible by the web. So if people need to change unlock doors or change schedules at the last minute when we have snow days or late openings, things like that, we're required to have somebody get into the system into the office remotely to access that computer software that will maintain the doors. So it's basically pretty inconvenient for staff at 5 o'clock in the morning asking them to do that work. The other feature that's not there that the city would like to have is the ability to lock down the doors for security purposes. Right now, it would take us 10-15 minutes before we could do a lockdown of all the doors, and that's a security issue that we would like to have the capability of making those changes immediately from cell phones.
And an example of that was when there was an active shooter, and there was we were not able to lock all of the doors right away, and so we did have a lot of people actually just monitoring the doors and being in a harmful situation. So we do want to make sure that we have that taken care of.
Yep. And the networks.
Go ahead. The network switches, yeah.
Basically give us the capability of supporting the additional systems that come online, as well as we need to replace the cable TV department is one area that has not received upgrades to technology, and the switches in there are all end of life and no longer supported by the vendor, which is Cisco. And it would be nice to bring those in line with the rest of the city before we have an accident with those. So that's it.
Thank you. And some of the contributions to work with City TV come out of the cable funds. In terms of the facility maintenance reserve, this year we only have one item in the schedule for replacement funded by the facility maintenance reserve, and that's replacement of the community center lobby doors. We're not making a contribution to the facility maintenance reserve this year. It has about $500,000 in it. We don't have a systematic approach to the facility maintenance reserve as we do for the equipment replacement reserve. And it is something I would like to see the city get to, but we don't have that at this point. The major use of the facility maintenance reserve that was envisioned for FY20 and then FY21, and now I'm moving to FY22, is the atrium fill-in phase 1 of the police department improvements. It was scheduled to begin in FY20. We had a price of somewhere about $330,000 estimated for that work. And there was a proposal to use a different kind of system rather than a traditional bid process to do the work. We did pursue that because it looked like it would have some financial benefits. It turned out it did not. The numbers came in about twice as high. And so we are returning to a traditional bid process. We do now have the bid documents, but with the onset of the pandemic and not knowing what would happen with all of the different projects, I moved the project to FY22. It's something that we can watch because we do have the bid documents now. If prices for construction come down, with the $500,000 in the facility maintenance reserve and the use of some cable grant funds, we may be able to afford to do the project. I think it's something that, depending on what happens with the facilities with the pandemic, it's something that may be advanced earlier than FY22 if the council wishes. But at this point, I moved it back, not wanting to have the staff essentially work on a big project at a time when so much else is in its plate. One of the most closely looked at items in the CIP are those that are funded by non-restricted general fund monies. And that's where, taxpayer money goes directly to these projects. Items that are paid for these general fund by the general fund include the ongoing infrastructure improvements that we do each year, and some new capital projects or equipment that maybe the first time they purchase, and then after we purchase them, we add them to the ERR. Some of the police department's items are in that category for this year. For FY21, the items or projects paid from the non-restricted general fund monies total $1.48 million. They include $99,000 for some IT equipment, Wi-Fi access points, security software, surveillance equipment over facilities that aren't already covered, a phone system replacement, all overseen by IT. And again, Lars, are there any items here that you think need some further explanation?
Basically, the security software, that's to enhance our protection with email, because there's a lot of attacks coming through email, especially as we are working remotely. We need the ability to better determine what is malware and what emails are dangerous. But also, one of the things that we're finding is that we will occasionally get an email that slips through our current Google system, and then we're scrambling trying to inform users not to click on something, and then we're getting emails that they clicked on something and they're sorry. And so this new system would enable us to recall messages that actually make it to people's inboxes that turn out to be malicious. That's a very good security feature, and the rest of everything is kind of self-explanatory, other than I would say that the phone system is way past end of life and no longer under support by the vendor. And we have run into issues where we have not been able to get things fixed. So that really needs to be done this year.
Thank you. The next items are some of the big ticket items, and I'll go into those in just a moment. We have $500,000 for street rehabilitation. This is, as I mentioned earlier, is very important to continue every year to keep up with our road work. We have sidewalk work, which could either be for new sidewalks, ADA retrofits. We have money in the proposed budget for bus shelter improvements and ADA site improvements at bus shelters. And I know, we've seen how important this is when, for example, the bus shelter at Holton Lane in New Hampshire got creamed. And then we weren't able to put it back because it needed to have ADA sidewalk retrofits first before we could put the shelter back. And we've got that kind of situation around the city. We have a number of bike facility improvements and community development and economic development activities. And I'll go through those in just a moment. So the street rehab work is guided by ratings of road condition that's done. And timely maintenance means that the much more expensive road base improvements are not needed. Roads in good condition also advance our Vision Zero goals by reducing accidents. Makes it safer to drive, safer to bike, cars don't veer, and that's all of those things are very important. The roads that may be, see, I've got to see if I can get this. There we go. Blocking my words. Roads that may be paved in FY21, and may is the operative word: Barclay Avenue, Baltimore Avenue between Tacoma and Albany, Eastridge Avenue, Garland Avenue between Floward and Central, Heather Alley, Kansas Lane, eastern to Cockrell, Maple Avenue, Philadelphia to Hilltop. Note that the list is tentative and may be changed. ADA sidewalk repairs will focus on sidewalks that aren't yet addressed in wards 1, 3, and 4, including Goody Avenue in Ward 3, which I know there's interest, Ritchie Avenue in Ward 4, and a number of locations in Ward 1. New sidewalk and traffic calming work is proposed to be limited in FY21 to $100,000 due to budget concerns. This is one that I'll want to spend some time on. Previous requests for this money have included the 7900 block of Maple Avenue and Kansas Lane. New requests have been submitted for Kentland, Hopewell, and Larch Avenues, and traffic calming concerns related to the Purple Line have been raised, particularly in Ward 6. And let's see, just want to double check something here. Daryl, could I have you speak a little bit to both the road work that's planned and the sidewalk work that's planned?
Sure. You council members may recall in the past we had a evaluation system that was done every 6 to 7 years on road condition. This past year, we were able to use a company called Robotics, which has a similar process for evaluating streets. So we had all the streets evaluated based on their software program. So the list of streets that we've identified come as a result of those that we had identified previously, as well as those that rated worst out of the Robotics analysis. One thing that is very evident, say over the past 10 years that the city's been contributing the substantial amount of funds for road conditions is the goal, of course, is to maintain our roads in a fair to better condition. And we're largely meeting that. We're able to get to roads before they start to fall below fair and get into the poor. We have no failed streets currently. So that's a good piece of news and shows that the program has been working very well to keep our roads in very good shape.
Thank you. And then for the ADA sidewalk repairs, so we have $250,000 for city sidewalks and $250,000 for SHA sidewalks. Could you go through a little bit? I'm not sure if I know if we've got SHA sidewalks on this list.
No, we haven't identified the state highway sidewalks. In this current fiscal year, our plan is to do a section of Carroll Avenue. That's right. We're combining that with a stormwater project at Manor Circle in Carroll because we have to remove some sidewalks at that intersection to add a stormwater inlet and connect to an existing stormwater structure further down Carroll. So we're going to take advantage of that construction and overlay the ADA work, which will go from that bus pullout where there's several trip hazards in the sidewalk down likely to about Boyd Avenue, maybe all as far down as Lincoln, and then return and go up the other side. that'll have some significant impacts to address what appears to be sunken sidewalks on that section of the road. So we'll be elevating the sidewalks so the drainage flows better, and we'll be correcting the driveway aprons and matching the lead walks in order for those each house to be able to access across the sidewalk.
Oh, thank you. And then for the new sidewalk and traffic calming work, I just want to let folks know that I'm the one that basically reduced the budget line here as I was trying to deal with the pandemic concerns and changes. The reason that I reduced the new sidewalk and traffic calming work was that at least with new sidewalks, they not having them is no different than they are right at the moment. It's not setting up a problem like not getting the road work done, where you have more of a cost impact when it finally comes due. But I am very concerned about limiting this fund, and there are some important areas. I know the Kentland, Hopewell, and Larch Avenues area probably needs significant thought. Some of the traffic calming concerns can be addressed by smaller activities such as striping and speed humps. But it is going to be something that devoting only $100,000 to new sidewalks and traffic calming work will, I think, cause some issues, and we need to think about the priorities on that. And I don't know, Daryl, did you have any other thoughts about those projects?
No, it's always a bit of a balancing act between how we do the work. In the past, the policy has been to try to bring our existing sidewalks to meet required ADA compliance before we add new sidewalk structures, just from an equity and a process that shows that we are addressing those known defects before we create new sidewalks. However, there can always be exceptions based on needs and other factors. So we do, work to try to balance it over time.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a really quick clarifying question?
Sure.
I wasn't clear whether you meant that the work on the SHA sidewalks for Carroll Avenue was in the FY20 budget, and that's something that's planned for this year, or if that's something that is included in this budget for the coming year.
Sorry about that. It is included this year. I think in my mind, we were certainly hoping to be able to start construction. We had originally about a month ago a start date from our contractor, who is now since backed off that. So it's our hope that that work can be done this fiscal year, or certainly included in the budget in this fiscal year. I didn't speak to what state highway related ADA work we were looking at for FY21. We had intended to do a more thorough analysis and kind of a rating system, as you and I had mentioned before. We do have a rating system that was performed by our engineering firm, WRA, through the state separately from us. They evaluated the sidewalks. They look at things a little bit differently than we do, so the information is not quite fully transferable from what we're looking for to what they were evaluating. They're mostly focused on curb ramps, whereas we were looking at driveway crossings and narrow sidewalks and things like that. So we haven't been able to complete that evaluation. I'm not at a comfort level to sort of lay out a ranking system for the remainder of the state highway related sidewalks, but we certainly hope to have one before the end of the fiscal year, so that going into FY21, we can make that public and folks can know kind of where they stand in terms of the sidewalk work. We certainly have gotten a lot of requests from that section of Carroll Avenue. That's one of the reasons, in addition to the kind of serendipity of joining the two projects together, one of the reasons why we're pursuing that.
Thank you.
Thanks. So there's a
Daryl, this is Kerry. I just was curious what sidewalk is needed on Ritchie Avenue.
Yeah, when we did the traffic calming, we did address some non-compliant curb ramps, but there are other sections of the sidewalk along Ritchie Avenue, particularly driveway aprons, as you go up from Mabel Avenue up to the top of the hill, that are not compliant. So we haven't done a full ADA compliant along Ritchie Avenue. There are several sections, and like I mentioned, particularly driveway aprons where we need to make corrections. That means that the sidewalk is sloped at greater than 2% across the driveway, so it makes it unsafe for those that are less able to cross.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. One of the things that has been going on this year has been a COG-funded ADA accessibility bus shelter study, and it is currently underway. There will be a report coming back to the council relatively soon. There was a desire to have funds in our in the CIP so that some bus shelter improvement could be done consistent with the City Council's resolution 2020-02. And so we wanted to put in quite a lot of money for this. We ended up reducing the amount, but we do want to partner it with some of the ADA sidewalk work to be able to accommodate a number of bus shelters. And I think I also have items on this slide related to bike facilities and public land management implementation. I'd like to turn it over to Roz now, who can go through a number of these items and explain what's proposed. Roz?
Yeah, hi, thank you. And I just wanted to add on to the bus shelter improvements that our preliminary findings from the COG representatives indicate that over 60% of our bus stops now are not compliant with ADA requirements. So we know that going into it. Most of those are about landing pads, which tend to be expensive changes. For bike improvements, our objective, as always, is to make biking more convenient and safer. And in the process, we know, especially you see it now as traffic has reduced, that people are riding more. And so we have intended to focus on connectivity and general needs from commuting and errands and recreation to provide ways that people can use biking. For both the bus shelters and the biking, these are steps forward in Council's priorities on climate crisis and on race equity. For the biking, we're looking at improving striping, signage, bike lanes. We had Maple Avenue on our radar, and as you know, we received a grant from a TLC grant from COG for technical assistance to look at Maple Avenue complete streets. We also have in mind the Purple Line construction impact on Ward 6 and recognize there may be places we can do temporary, if not permanent, changes to ease some of those pressures and include multimodal transportation options for people. We need community input for that. So we recognize on all of our work that we need community input. We're a little stymied on that right now, as you know. The New Hampshire Avenue Bikeways project is a long-term project. You've seen earlier stages of this. We are now wrapping up the engineering design for 60% plans for Section A, which is from Holton Lane to Auburn. We have an overlapping grant that's starting this spring for the Section B to get to 60% plans, and that's from down to Poplar. We're applying for design grants to get us to 100% plus bid documents. But the Section B 60% design really straddles 3 fiscal years. So there's a little bit of funding that will be spent in FY20. The bulk of it and our best estimate of it will be spent in FY21. And then there's a small amount of money in FY22. So 80% of it is grant money, 20% of it is a city match. The part that's starting now is almost $300,000. It's $293,000. And so the city match is $58,000 and some, and the grant is the rest of that. And your numbers are different because it's divided into the 3 fiscal years. We've already submitted a letter of intent for the 100% design, and we'll follow up with the application this spring. Susie, did you want me to mention public art as well?
Yes, why don't you go ahead and mention public art? I had it on the previous screen, and then the public land management implementation.
Sure. So for the public art, It's a $25,000 allocation. For FY20, we did several smaller projects, the public piano, the Octoclock, the Caterpillar on New Hampshire Avenue, and then the bird calls at Erie and Flower. The larger projects for FY20 have been postponed. Those are the Lincoln Avenue mural, the Holton Lane sculpture project, and the B.Y. Morrison mural rehabilitation. If those funds are repurposed this fiscal year, we will have eliminated a year of major public art projects in the city. If the funds are carried over, then first in the queue would be the Lincoln Avenue mural. We already have the call for artists and the semifinalists identified, and then Holton, B.Y. Morrison, and then a future project. For the public space plan, we really wanted funds to start implementing. We have, of course, been delayed because this spring was the plan to do the community outreach and in public input for the visions, goals, guidance for exactly how we want to proceed on this. The plan will be an update from the 1994 open space plan that the city did. So you can see that we're ready to look again at those issues. It includes both city and county parks. We've already done a conditions assessment. We did an inventory, we've done a conditions assessment. We're also including public right-of-way within the city, including streets, sidewalk, medians, neighborhood paths, paper streets, corresponding activation of public space. We look at the funds as possible first steps, probably things like the possibility of parklet conversions or possible easements or sort of rehabilitation of space into other uses than it may now serve, especially for something like public streets or right-of-way space. These would begin to look at green space improvements following the community outreach sessions. And so now we're probably looking at fall to really have that kind of public engagement and conversation about these. We care as you care about the race equity issues. And so public space is a place where the city can really make strides in giving access, easy access, close access, diverse kinds of space for all our residents.
Thank you very much. And you know, for just 30,000, which yes, it's some money, but it's also not a lot of infrastructure money. We can bring some green space and usable green space to some sections of the city that don't have it. So that's part of what we've been looking at. The next item that I'd like to address has to do with neighborhood commercial center improvements, and it's part of our economic development support efforts. For this, Samira Cook-Gaines, could you speak a little bit to how the $75,000 would be used?
Good evening, Council, and my fellow colleagues and residents watching. The $75,000 in neighborhood commercial center improvements is really a part of our efforts to clean up, beautify many of our commercial districts that don't have, you know, the luxury of just having the natural maybe greenery and things like that around them. For example, $50,000 of this money is being used as a match to the Maryland Facade Grant, which we won this year for $100,000. With that said, the rest, that money was earmarked just for the New Hampshire Avenue corridor and businesses along that corridor. The remaining amount of that money will be used elsewhere in the city. And we already have several inquiries about that facade money. So that's what the $75,000 would be used for. $50,000 is definitely needed for the match in the coming year. And that $25,000 again would be for businesses that are not just on New Hampshire Avenue corridor.
Thank you very much. like to go now to those projects in the CIP that are funded by bonds. And at this point, it's only the library bond that remains. We've completed the Flower Avenue, we will have completed the Flower Avenue, Green Street, and Ethan Allen Avenue project, which were funded with the transportation bonds. So for FY21, we're just looking at the library project. It shows in the CIP that there's approximately $3.6 million estimated to be spent on a library project. I think it will not be that high because we're a little bit more delayed in getting to the point where we would have bid documents and see what the council wants to do and then go out to bid. So over FY21 and FY22 would be the construction time for the library project. Those funds, because they're coming from the library bond, are not directly taxpayer funded. Only the $390,000 for debt comes from taxpayers at this moment. For speed camera funded purchases and projects, we have just 2 items to be purchased from the speed camera fund in the CIP. That's the camera trailer for $33,000 and a bike patrol unit equipment for $18,000. The bulk of the funds, staff of the speed camera fund pay for the system, which includes 3 staff members who do public safety in the police department, who monitor the speed camera program or do traffic monitoring and that kind of thing. Chief, do you want to speak at all to the status of the speed camera fund, particularly given the pandemic, and what these items are?
Sure thing. First off, I think we brought this to council earlier. We renegotiated our contract with Conduit, our speed camera contractor, with a drastically reduced fee to the city, which saved us a significant amount of money, about $300,000 annually. With that, we also got brand new equipment that is to be installed. There has been a delay on the installation due to the pandemic of the new equipment on New Hampshire Avenue and other locations. As I've spoken before, we expect increased revenue with this new equipment. For example, our current equipment on New Hampshire Avenue only captures 1 lane of traffic. These new cameras will capture all 3 lanes of traffic. We have not been able to do an assessment yet of how the pandemic, what the effect has had on our revenue as far as a speed camera revenue on a monthly basis. We should be able to do that next month and be able to come back with an idea of where we are as far as reduced, the same. I can tell you this, people are going there are a lot less people out there, but they're going a lot faster as they're out there. As far as the equipment that comes directly from that fund, the bike patrol equipment is to repurchase or to purchase new equipment. We're hoping to expand our bike patrol, have a lot more officers involved. That's for a community engagement aspect, but also for our officers to get out and exercise more. So it's a win-win for us in getting our officers out in the community, but also allowing them to have an outlet where they can exercise and so on and so forth. So what that's for is for some new bikes, some new equipment, and it's also to replace some aging equipment, some of our old bikes and old equipment. The camera trailer, we were scheduled to purchase this, I believe last year, maybe the previous year. It's a camera that can be placed in different crime locations, and it can capture not only video of locations, but it also can capture license plates and so on and so forth. We look to put that strategically in areas where we're having problems. If we're having a rash of burglaries, a rash of thefts, we can remotely put that in different areas. So, these are 2 items that we think are important to the police department, important to the operation of the police department. And like I said, we're excited about the new contract. We're hopeful that we'll be able to generate more funds. One thing I do want to state, and it's very important, the speed camera program is not to generate money. It's to deter people from speeding. And I think that's really important. And I can't hammer that home enough, the importance and the reason that we have the program.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question about that?
Yes, please.
So I know it's hard to predict, and I appreciate that the chief said next month we may have more information on how I suppose the lack of people driving around because the economy is down and so on is affecting it. But what would happen if the pandemic continued longer than we hope, and there were several months of what turned out to be significant drop-offs, since the money, is only available to support the staff and their equipment. What would be the impact if something like that were to occur?
It's a good question. I mean, I think one of the things that, this for FY21 should be noted that, our estimated revenue is about $1 million, but our expenditures is only about 3/4 of that. So it gives us some leeway as we look at how the revenues come in. In the past, a number of years ago, when the courts changed how speed cameras could work and how we would get paid for from the speed camera system, and it really made a big decline in the amount of revenue that we could get from speed cameras. We did change and had to move there were at one point 6 staff that were being paid for out of the speed camera fund. And there was a lot of sidewalk work that was done with the speed camera fund. We've changed that over the years. So we look to see how the revenues come in, and if we need to make changes, we will come back to the council.
Okay. Thank you.
Special revenue funded projects are some of my favorite projects because they're grant funded projects. And the city of Tacoma Park has been very successful in getting a lot of grants. Our staff do a great job in applying for grants, in being known as a good steward of grants. So the grant funders like to work with us. And so we do have a number of grants that will be funding projects that are either ongoing or in the coming years. In FY21, grants in the total of about $1.3 million are expected. Items include some funds from City TV, from the cable capital grants for City TV, which had to do with closed captioning and a new council dais. Both of these things are really for activities that happen in the auditorium, as the auditorium is used as a programming space. There's a proposal to do some CDBG improvements in the Houston Court area. We have a CDBG grant of $91,000 for those improvements. It's to look at a variety of safety and physical improvements in that area. Also with a sustainability, with an eye to sustainability. We have the remaining Flower Avenue grant, Green Street project grants. It may very well be that these funds are expended. These grant funds are expended in FY20 because when we were preparing the budget, we were in a real slowdown on the Flower Avenue Green Street project. And so we estimated that these funds would be expended in FY21. It may very well be that they get expended in this fiscal year. And so we will follow along. We at least get the funds whichever fiscal year it's in. We have the New Hampshire Avenue Bikeway Design Grants that were spoken to before. And we have the $300,000 in state grants for the library project. Only a few of these projects, a few of these grants require matches, but when they do, they're usually identified as coming from the general fund, unrestricted fund monies. From our stormwater fee, we have a number of stormwater improvements. The bulk of the fund's revenue goes to maintenance projects, the oversight by the engineer, but we have a number of capital projects that tend to range in the $250,000 range every year. The items or projects this time for FY21, $30,000 for the Grant Avenue and Holly Avenue bioretention project, $150,000 for the phase 2 of the Tacoma Branch stream restoration, and $70,000 for the Sligo Mill dead end erosion control. Daryl, could you speak a little bit to these 3 projects and how the Stormwater Fund functions?
Sure. The Stormwater Fund, in addition to the capital projects that you see here, also covers city engineer's half of his time, as well as a number of maintenance programs and projects that Susie mentioned. First and foremost is our video inspection and water quality testing that we are required to do annually now. So we maintain records get to about a fourth to a fifth of the system every year is video inspected to maintain the integrity and identify any possible problems. We also have more minor repairs that we put in a operating budget, not considered capital. The list of repairs that we've identified for next fiscal year includes stormwater treatment at Elson and 14th, in keeping with the sidewalk work that was done there years ago. Allegheny Circle and Cockrell Avenue, we have a stormwater pipe that goes under private properties. We want to move the facility to the right-of-way. Houston Court, we're looking to do some stormwater work. And again, part of what we've identified is a way to partner with the CDBG funds, potentially sustainability money. So we really want to do a very environmentally friendly project out there. And we're kind of using all our assets to get more work done than might otherwise be possible. And then there are a system of some inlets and backyards on a section of Garland Avenue that are failing, so we need to do some repairs there. So in addition to capital work, we do maintenance work, and then we also do system assessment and cleaning.
Thank you. Can you describe just a little bit about the Tacoma Branch stream restoration? That's not actually started yet, right? The first phase?
Right. We had funds in this fiscal year and broke that out into a 2-year project, primarily due to the significant cost for that project. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to take a look at that area. It's below 4th Avenue and Poplar Avenue and New Hampshire Avenue. I get there about at least once, sometimes twice a year, and the deterioration from year to year is remarkable in terms of erosion and stream bed collapse. So it's a natural area. The Sligo Mill area is a natural area that's actually owned by Park and Planning, but we have a maintenance agreement with them. There's a long history of how that was worked out, where the city contributed and Park and Planning contributed to keep that area from being developed for a townhouse development. The stream is now entirely stormwater fed, so there's no natural stream flow. It's all piped from both DC as well as Tacoma Park. So we have a large outfall that is being undermined that we have to address, and we're also planning to create more naturalized storm flow and channels in the stream to reduce the erosion and replace some of the tree cover and some of the other issues with the stream, and to stop the rapid deterioration of that body of water that leads directly into the Anacostia.
Thank you. I know that was one we did try to get grant funds for and couldn't, but it's such an important project that I'm glad that we've been doing it, and would love to see it actually get done. So hopefully that can get started soon. Since we're talking about the capital improvement program, I wanted to talk about debt service, because we do borrow money for major projects. When you borrow money, you allow those who are benefiting from the facilities that get built to help pay for them over time. Neither the state of Maryland nor the city charter mandates a limit on municipal debt, but we try to maintain our net tax supported debt at a level not to exceed 1% of the assessed valuation of taxable property. At this time, the net tax supported debt should not exceed 23.9 million, and ours only is 14.3 million. So we're well within our fiscal constraints on the amount of debt that we pay for and hold at any one time. Right now we have 4 bonds that are outstanding. There's also a one-time community legacy loan agreement that will hit us next year. The 4 bonds include the community center bond, which was renegotiated in 2015 for about 1.5 million. The final payment is due in 2025. The average annual payment on the debt is $183,000. The public works facility bond was in the amount of 1.5 million. And this year we'll pay off this bond with a final payment of $175,000. So yes. We had the transportation bond that funded the Flower Avenue and Ethan Allen projects. It was an amount of $2 million. It's a 15-year bond that will be finally paid off in 2032. And the library bond was in the amount of $7 million as a 30-year bond. It will be paid off in 2047. The average annual payment on the debt for it is $390,000. The one-time payment, we had a community legacy loan years ago. It just needed to be paid back at one point. It was the time seemed like it was a long time in the future, but it's coming up next year. So that's $150,000 that's scheduled to be paid next June 2022. And I have a bit of a chart here that shows the total level of debt service. That's the taller bar is the total amount of debt service payments for each year as we go out through from 2021 to 2047. As you'll see, next year our number goes up because of the $150,000 community legacy loan one-time payment. But in general, the rates go down a little bit as the various bonds are paid off. I think that we handled these bond payment amounts well, and they're very reasonable for the benefits that we get. So that's the completion of this budget work session presentation. Our next budget work session will be on departmental and non-departmental budgets. And obviously reconciliation. I know there's more discussion that people want to have this evening, but my formal presentation is completed.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation tonight and for all the staff who are also with us. I'd like to kick us off with a couple of questions I had during the presentation, which is regarding sidewalk work. What is generally the timing of when we do sidewalk work in the city?
Daryl, can you answer that?
Sure. It can vary from year to year depending on what else is going on or what we're trying to coordinate with our vendors. But we typically have a fall cycle and a spring and summer cycle.
Okay.
The turnaround time on that isn't a lot. If there's not, coordination has to be done with utilities. It's more just a discussion with our vendors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, primarily it's scheduling, just getting in the queue for our contractor. We try to be sensitive to giving them advance notice of the work we want to do so they can plan it and combine it with the work that they've got already commitments for. And so we try to work with them on when we can get them in. We typically like to do, significant chunks at once, just to maximize. Most of the time we're having a consulting engineering inspector on site as well as our contractor and then our own construction manager. So we like to coordinate all that and get it done in large sections rather than piecemeal.
Great. And then on the same question, on the $100,000 for new sidewalks that's budgeted in this proposed budget, I want to clarify, does that include new sidewalks, and any traffic calming we would do would come under that $100,000?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're all clear on that. That $100,000 covers traffic calming as well as new sidewalk construction, because I know we have a number of requests in the wings, so to speak, on that. Another thing that I just want to raise is that purchases that would happen from the equipment reserve, if they're over $10,000, would come to council, like we just discussed the van, replacement van. And so if there was any time that we were going through the budget next year regarding any of the items we discussed that are over $10,000, the council would have a conversation about that and have to okay those purchases.
That's right.
Okay. And I guess I'm maybe a little more discussion on the public land management, thinking that if we haven't begun the public engagement part yet, and that gets pushed off, I guess I'm just trying to time things out in terms of when we would might use the $30,000, the funds, and how that might work.
Right. So, it's a little bit awkward, but we also have a situation where it's helpful to have those funds, because if we're trying to solve a problem, if we're trying to do something around the Crossroads Farmers Market, and we want to be able to have some area that's associated with it, it's useful to partner and use those kinds of funds. We don't have at this point a list of those projects that the council wants to do. So I appreciate that we don't know that exactly, but it is something that might help solve a problem that may come up.
Great. And I know Councilmember Kovar has raised this before in our discussions regarding the budget, but given the time we're in right now, if, for example, potentially some sidewalk work and the public land management, if we were to reassess those, say, after the first quarter of the fiscal year, that's a time that the council could reassess whether or not those funds are then used moving forward for sidewalk work, say, if for the spring summer cycle, and the land management money being used in like the spring summer for specific projects. So if they were kept in the budget, those could be areas where we identified we specifically wanted to come back to after the first quarter.
Absolutely. And it makes a perfect sense to have a number of those items that have that are kind of on a list that we hold off, we think about, but we hold off on until we see what the economic situation is.
Great. Okay. So any of my colleagues on the City Council have questions, if you want to just, I think you can raise your hand like we've been doing before. If you just click on the participant icon in the bottom of your screen, you should be able to raise your hand. Councilwoman DeBala.
Yes. There we go. So just in terms of questions as opposed to suggestions for places to discuss. So going way back to the pre-presentation, just a quick question about the recreation revenues, the 132,000 that you mentioned, City Manager, is that for this year or for this year and next year? Which one were you referring to?
It's mostly this year because most people have already paid for summer camp.
Right.
So it's, the recreation department has a very awkward situation with the fiscal year coming right at the time when they're doing summer programs.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you. On roads, a question for the Public Works Director. So there's an assessment of the road. There's a list of roads and they come up periodically. Every road comes up every so many years. And then there's a rating system. You go out and look at all those roads that are up for that year. Is there anything between fair and poor? Is there a fair plus and fair minus? Is there some way in this short term, in this current situation, to distinguish in that category which ones are more important to do now and which ones could be held off on?
I can inquire to the city engineer about that. What I asked him to provide me was a list of the worst streets up to $500,000 worth of work. So working from the bottom up, that was the list that we were provided. There were some streets that were included on there that other jurisdictions are going to get. For instance, there's a section of Tacoma Avenue between Buffalo and Fenton that's going to be addressed by Pepco at the end of their project. A section of Philadelphia Avenue, Old Philadelphia Avenue between Chestnut and Holly, again, a WSSC related restoration. So there's some streets that come up rated poor, but they're going to be paved through a utility agreement. Or there's others where we know that there's upcoming utility agreements that we don't want to get ourselves involved. So I just ask for the bottom level of those streets for this. If you wanted to see the whole street analysis, we could provide that for you street by street in the rating.
I would be more interested in a sense of whether there's a natural break that and about how much that would be worth rather than literally every single street.
Yeah, where we came up with, and this was some time ago, I think 2004, where we had a full analysis of our current road conditions, and baked into that was an assumption that the roads need to be resurfaced every 20 years. And so we developed a fund level of 500,000 that needed to be provided annually in order to keep us on track in a reasonable fashion to make sure that our streets stayed fair condition and better. So we've primarily developed that amount of funds based on that analysis that was done back now almost 15 years ago. I don't really feel like we need to go back around and do a full analysis. I think we've seen in the past 15 years that funding level has done very well to keep roads in a good condition. I don't know if anybody can remember back 15 plus years, but we had a lot of roads that were in failed condition at that point. So our roads are in really solid shape. And because of that, we spend less for maintenance, future maintenance, as well as restoration in the future, because we don't have to rebuild road bases and things like that. We're able to just resurface the streets and take care of them at the time. So we're really kind of built up with a funding level versus a road condition analysis.
Okay, thank you. Someone else can.
Okay, Councilmember Kovar.
Oh, I'm up now?
Yeah.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions and a couple of comments. So maybe for the city manager first, the questions. You've talked some about this, and I think we've all, maybe many of us, not all of us, have grappled with it. But I think two areas that are a little difficult to understand at times relate to the way, I understand it anyway, the bond funds that have been borrowed and not yet spent show up on the ledger, so to speak, and then the relationship that you talked about a little bit to the unassigned reserves. And so my understanding is, because we're not operating at a deficit, but that the bond monies have to be accounted for as if they were expenditures even when we haven't spent them. Is that correct? And is that why it shows a gap between expenditures and revenues? Or maybe you can just expand.
I don't think that's
how would you describe that?
I think I have to, well, I think there's a couple things. One is that obviously we've borrowed money and it's in our bank account. It's essentially, I guess not literally, but on the papers, and so it's considered part of our general fund. But we also have a promise that we pay it, and so there's this bond reserve that's set aside that says, you know, we're ensuring that we're going to pay this money. So it's in kind of in an additional set aside that just is an assurance to the auditors that we have the funds available to pay for this project. As we spend on the project, then we don't have to have that reserve set aside, and it is released to the unappropriated reserve. So it's kind of like we're double booking the same number until we pay it, and so it's simply it's just an extra leverage to ensure that we go forward on a project that we borrowed for.
Right, but so in the earlier parts of the budget document, it shows there's tables that you and the staff have prepared that show the revenue amounts and the expenditures for the fiscal years, and then the proposed amount for the coming year. And of course, that may change a little bit going forward, but it shows a gap there. And but we don't have a deficit. So is that gap explained by the funds that are sitting there?
It's displayed by the unappropriated, unassigned reserve and the bond funds. Yes, okay. You know, a lot of the expenditure money is for the library, and you know, it's coming from what's essentially a restricted fund. It just doesn't show that way on those sheets, so that's why it does look out of balance.
So, in terms of the relationship to the unassigned reserves, so if, for example, and I know we don't know if we would, well, first of all, we've only approved the design money. We don't know what's happening with construction, but if we decide to go forward with construction, it seems like we may not get too deeply into it next year, but you're saying we potentially could. So if some amount of funds are spent for construction, and that has the effect of increasing the unassigned number, is that right?
That's right, by the amount that we spend from the library bond. Yes. And
so at the moment, with the unassigned number a little bit or somewhat below the 17% target that we have, is that something that we should want to put more money into it? I mean, I know a city manager would always say we ought to have more money in reserves. This is maybe the year when we have to tap into some of the reserves, but is it problematic from your perspective to not have that percent at the 17 in the documents as they currently appear?
I'm actually comfortable with it because we have the bond reserve, which put together is greater than the 17%. Okay. If, you know, frankly, if I were to put some more money into reserves, I'd put it to the equipment replacement reserve.
Okay. So thank you for all those questions, and I'll look again at those areas and see if I can maybe follow up in writing. And just a couple of suggestions. I mentioned this in a note to my colleagues, but only a little bit prior to this meeting. And so I know it's hard to keep up with all the emails. So I'm just going to say these are things I'd like us to have for discussion on reconciliation. And I say that understanding that for the city manager, some of these ideas may not be what her preference would be, but I think some things are helpful to discuss in any case. One of the features of the budget document, which I think is really helpful, is in the capital improvement plan. It rates all the various projects on a scale of 1 to 4, and 1 being the most needed, 2 being somewhat less so but still important, 3 being desirable, and the 4th, I'm not going to say optional, but as you go down higher, 3 and 4 are less significant in some ways than 1 and 2. And so I didn't do it in an exhaustive way, but I looked through them fairly quickly and just counted the ones that I thought were public safety related with the police, and those where there were matching grants associated with it, because I don't think we want to be leaving money on the table in that way. But it seemed to add up to $300,000 and $400,000. So one of the things that I would propose, and I understand for us to discuss in reconciliation, and I understand that if you don't spend on these things, you don't just, for 1 year, you can't just get them right back the next year. It takes a couple of years for that bulge to sort of flow through the budget. But I'd like to at least have on the table for discussion that we would look at not doing the 3s and 4s for the coming year. And there's a long list of them. I'm not going to go through them all right now. They're all meritorious projects, but I just think given where we are, that's the challenge. And that,
if I may, I'm sorry, Councilmember Kovar, I will say that because we were in the midst of transition and rushing, I personally didn't review all of those category rankings this year before the budget got printed. And so I would want to look at those myself to see if they were adequate, you know, if I even agree with those rankings. But I certainly appreciate looking at the higher rankings
I mean,
priority.
Whether they're precisely perfect in every case is one thing, but the concept is that if we got to a point where we couldn't do them all, we'd want to start with those that had lower rankings. I mean, that's the whole
Exactly.
purpose of it. And then getting back to what I guess the mayor said, what I was kind of thinking about and the way I described it and what I sent to my colleagues was that one thing to do would be just don't spend that money, or don't spend as much as we're talking about, or any of it on sidewalks. That's an option. I'd like to have us discuss that. But a second option would be to go ahead and put some of those things in the budget, but kind of put them on probation was the way I was thinking about it. So they would sit there, we would know we would have them. We don't know right now what our needs are going to be in terms of helping people who are affected by COVID-19, lower income residents, small businesses, et cetera. And then we could assess, I think this is what the mayor was talking about, in 3 months or whenever, and decide then, look, we set aside this money, it's however many hundreds of thousands of dollars or more, depending on what we do. Now we get to a point where we can decide, and then we can make it available. So there's a couple of ways to think about it. You could just say, we're not going to include, for example, money for the sidewalks. And if you just don't include it at all, then that could enable a reduction in the property tax rate. Or you could include some of it or all of it, but on this probationary basis, could then make it available for assistance for people affected or businesses affected by the pandemic. So those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking we should do. And then there'll be agreements or disagreements about which sets of funds. And then one last question, and then I'll stop and give other people a chance. I'm sorry to be going on at such length. I think it says in the budget documents that the ERR, unlike, for example, the housing reserve, which we could decide tomorrow, we're going to use it for helping renters or people who are homeowners who are struggling. The ERR and its purposes are included in the city charter, right? So it's one thing to say, here's money we're going to put into it, 600,000, and we can decide what we want to do. But money that's in the ERR, am I right, unless there's a change in the charter, which has several steps you have to go through in order to do that, it's not as if we could just grab that money immediately if we even decided we wanted to and had the votes for doing that. So it's, again, a really long question, but maybe you can just respond briefly to that if you don't mind. Thanks.
I'll have to look at the charter, but I believe the charter has some language in it that is less stringent than what we use for our contributions. So there could be some opportunity for a discussion about handling the ERR a little bit differently without having to do a charter change. I think that, you know, of the various places to look, I'd prefer not to look at the ERR. There's a reason, a financial reason that was set up so that, which helps the city over the long term. But I think there are some ways to, it is a little bit of more of a challenge to deal with that one than with some of the other reserve funds.
And I would just say, I appreciate that. I would just say on all these things, the number 3s and the number 4s, the ERR, the sidewalks, the street repairs, all those things, the housing reserve, all those things are valuable initiatives that help the city. And in normal years, it's just, we do what we decide we want to do, and that's it. This is just a difficult, unusual year, which is why I'm bringing those things up. So,
right.
On the ERR, just a specific information request. If we could get what the contributions have been over the past few years, because I'm still not finding it in here. Maybe it is.
Yeah, we'll send it out. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And that would give a sense of perspective on the ERR. I think that's missing right now. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. All right. Then I have Councilman Kostick.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of kind of bigger picture questions and then 2 more specific questions. First of all, just building off the discussion related to the ERR, would one option be potentially to not dedicate the entire, I think it's 600,000 to the ERR that has been recommended and would be typical for the contribution to the ERR, but to sort of temporarily assign that in the general fund reserve for potential future assignment to the ERR mid-year? Is that an option if if we decide we don't need those funds and we want to go ahead with those ERR purchases?
I don't know if that's an option. I would strongly disagree with that as a way to handle it. There's a lot of other places where I think you could do something like that, but I'd really, the way that the ERR functions and has been set up, I'd be very reluctant to do that.
Thank you. So the other question with regard to the general fund unassigned funds, in terms of our expenditures for this year, obviously we've had some things that have been larger expenditures than were initially anticipated and some things that we haven't been able to spend money on. Are you anticipating a significant amount of unused funds from this year that would then go into the reserve, the general fund reserve, and you said then that's rolled over into the next year to go into the line items? Are you anticipating that we're going to have more than we typically have in terms of unused funds from this year?
You know, there may be some conference money. You know, I mean, I frankly think it's unlikely that the Maryland Municipal League Conference in Ocean City will take place in June and that kind of thing. So there will be some funds that could be identified. I think that they're pretty much offset by the lack of revenue from the recreation programs. And we're continuing to pay recreation staff at least through June that would have functioned in our after-school programs and that kind of thing. So I think there's some, we've rated some of that for some of the mini grant programs and the emergency assistance program because that's where the money is really needed. There may be some more that could be taken from that, but I think that it's, I don't think it's a lot at this point.
Okay. And then looking at for the CIP, at kind of the end of the specific line by line list in the CIP, it has a list of CIP items funded by the general fund capital outlay. And I was just looking back at the previous years as well as some of the anticipated amounts for that. And it looks to me like our amount this year is really pretty small in terms of what is proposed here, about 1.4 million, estimated about 2 million for last year, the year before about 1.5 million, but then it really jumps up for next year's anticipated at 3.7. And I'm wondering if that is due to the library in some way. I mean, I wouldn't expect that would have an impact on the general fund.
It's due to me pushing back these projects, the sidewalk projects, and I mean, unfortunately, I think it's going to be a problem. I don't think we can do it all in FY22, but it was an opportunity to kind of park it while we have this community conversation and council conversation about how to move forward. I think it's not, you know, I don't think that it's going to be able to be that big.
Yeah. So we're likely looking at in the coming year, some of these things that are in this FY22 anticipated should be purchased, should be done in FY22 column are probably not going to be able to be funded in the coming year. Yeah.
That's my guess. Yeah.
All right. I then just have two more specific questions. One is with regard to sidewalks. And I'm wondering, with regard to the $250,000 in the ADA for city sidewalks, one of the projects is Goody Avenue, which needs to be done and is likely to be pretty expensive because of some of the retaining walls and the size of the project. And we've talked about maybe splitting it into two sections and some other options. I'm wondering for that project, how far we could get with 250,000, if that could realistically move the needle on that project. And then I'm also wondering about the 100,000 that's been proposed for new sidewalks and traffic calming. That doesn't seem like a lot in terms of allowing us to really do any sort of substantial sidewalk project at all. And I'm wondering sort of about the breakdown between, obviously we want to do ADA improvements, and there are some places that genuinely need ADA improvements because they don't have ADA access and they're just really in bad condition. And then I think there are probably some places where there may be not in the greatest condition, but they could probably continue to function and are fairly accessible. I'm wondering about the division of allocating some more of those funds to new sidewalks, or if it's best to maintain those in the ADA overall.
I think that's a good question, and Ms. Braithwaite may be able to answer it as well about Goody. I think the area where there may be some flexibility is on the SHA ADA sidewalk allocation. So there may be something that can go to help augment the new sidewalk or traffic calming items. Daryl, what is your comment about the likely cost of Goody?
We need to look again to confirm, but I think that $250,000 would likely finish most of it for Goody. So we'd have to make a policy decision whether we wanted the entire annual allocation to go towards that 2 blocks, or whether we wanted to pick up and use it interspersed in some of the other wards where work needs to be done. $100,000 in ADA will get you some significant work when you're just doing replacing sidewalks and fixing driveway aprons. As you mentioned, the Goody Avenue project is still, I think we're pretty close to a design, but we still have some neighborhood engagement process to kind of come to a final design with that. So it is a situation where we could split it in half, though I do feel a little uncomfortable doing that because you can't make something half accessible. So it really then opens us up to a potential complaint or creating a problem. So we'd kind of have to look at that, and we'd look for council guidance as to whether or not you'd like us to do several small projects or one big project and fund it entirely through that.
And for the new sidewalks, would 100,000 go anywhere in terms of being able to construct something?
I would imagine that, at least what I've heard so far, we have several smaller petition requests that we've received, several in Ward 6. And from my understanding, a lot of those had to do with signage and speed humps. Those are fairly low cost traffic calming options. The project that we've had a request for with Hopewell, Kentland, and Larch, I would think that we could get quite a bit of that done since the blocks are so small in terms of what they're looking at as both sidewalk as well as traffic calming. So it would engage both those. We also need to redesign the school bus stop location in that area. So I would think that we could go quite a ways. It may be one where we could do the design work this year and start construction, and then use funding in the next fiscal year to finish construction, start in a May, June and roll through July kind of scenario if we found that we needed additional funding.
Thank you. And then my last question for now, and I also want to say thank you because a lot of the questions I sent ahead of time were addressed in the presentation, so I really appreciate that. My last question is regarding the neighborhood commercial center improvements. It sounds like obviously the 50,000 is related to the matching grant, if I took my notes properly. I'm wondering about the remaining 25,000 that's proposed here. Obviously, I think the neighborhood, the facade improvements, making a nicer environment around the businesses is really important. But I'm wondering, given the current economic situation, if that is the best way to help the businesses at this time, and if there's some alternative assistance to them that might actually be more effective in meeting their needs.
Samira, do you have a response to that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I feel like
should the $25,000 that for the neighborhood commercial, would it be better used not as facade and signage, but for some other need for businesses?
So I think it's a hard call because I mentioned the last time that it's more of a triage conversation, right? So I couldn't even give you at this stage who is going to be here after this is all over. So the call is really, and I would put it back onto the council really, because the call would be either, you know, helping in survival, right? Helping a state of emergency. This is an individual one-on-one kind of grant focus. And it may get some folks over to the other side. However, if we end up in a space where we lose a number of our businesses, we are going to want to have something to kind of step up the facades, the signage, those things that are not going to get any investment for, I can easily say, the next 3 to 5 years from the businesses themselves, or even the property owners. So it's a hard call for me. I will say that our residents and our small businesses have really stepped up with donations. Even the smallest donation has helped. I would be cautious about transferring that 25 over. We've already moved 20,000 from that fund for FY20 into the mini grant fund, because of course there will be no, you know, there's going to be no facade work for between now and June. So we've done it already. I'm not sure that that I would do it again, because it is the rest of the city. So yeah, it would really be a call for the council. I'm happy to do either one, because both really serve our businesses and they are in dire straits.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And if we did want to look at shifting those funds, where in the budget do the funds show up for in terms of other assistance to businesses?
So what we've been doing is spending directly out of the line items and just kind of noting it. So we didn't do a physical shift of the money, but we have a documented shift, and we're spending it directly out of the line items. If you were going to shift that 25 though, there's a separate account for the Small Business Mini Grant Fund. It has its own account where all the donations are going separately. And that's where you would shift it to. It's a brand new account number that I don't even know yet, but I know that it exists and I have it in my email and can pull it up for you.
So it would be a journal entry to change it, and then eventually there'll be a budget amendment, or through this process we'll clarify so that it's clear in the documents.
And I do want to mention that there still would be $150,000 for facade improvement and signage, just not for the entire city. It's in our most needed area, which would be the New Hampshire Avenue corridor.
And just really quickly, does that include going all the way down to Eastern, or is that primarily in the Crossroads area?
So the identified target area has been primarily Crossroads, but it starts at New Hampshire and Ethan Allen, actually. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the first location, that that specific kind of corner. Yeah, that hasn't really been touched in quite a while.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I just want to make a point, and I think the city manager is doing this, but just to clarify one of the questions regarding unused funds this year, even though we don't think there will be much given the uncertainty and how things are shaking out at the moment. But if there are, I would like to have that be a council conversation, because going off of what I think Councilwoman Searcy mentioned last week, is really thinking about the need that we have right now to help people stay afloat. And I know from a conversation I had with Ms. Cook Gaines last week, even though we're able to provide a third of the businesses who applied for the mini grant program some grant, that it's a third, and we have still 2/3 that are in need. So, you know, I think it goes without saying, but I figured I would say it.
Well, thank you. And Mayor, if I might, I mean, I just we just really got some calculations on even the rec revenue changes just in the past couple days. So part of this is just the last minute, making sure and double counting and to double checking to make sure that we have the right numbers in these various line items. So yes, we'll share. When we know it, we'll share it.
Mm-hmm. Great. Councilmember Seaman?
Unmute. There we go.
Yep.
You good?
Yes, just a couple things I wanted to comment on. And Ms. Ludlow, I first wanted to thank you so much for looking into the use of more energy efficient cars for the police department. That's something that has been long talked about, but it's nice to see progress toward actually attaining that now. And then the second thing was, and I know you talked about it earlier, but since there was some other discussion by other council members about the equipment reserve, that we had really had to struggle. The council had to struggle years ago when the reserve was not maintained at an accurate level. It was just a small amount of money was put into it, and it was a constant fire drill from year to year as more vehicles were needed, and there wasn't enough money for that, and having to make large allocations to buy the vehicles that were needed. And in fact, there were many years where we were not able to buy the vehicles that were needed, and the employees really suffered from that. So I appreciate your kind of holding the fort on that and to the best extent that you can, and letting people know that it's, having a scientific approach to determining the equipment reserve is a valuable management approach, and I appreciate that. Thank you. And that's all. Thank you.
Great. So Councilwoman Searcy.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, for all of your hard work and kind of walking through a number of the items in the SIP. And my colleagues asked a lot of the questions that I'm interested in, but I want to kind of go back to a couple of things. One is I know the bus shelter improvements and the bus shelters. And I know my ward is notorious for having cars completely take out our shelters. Can we just verify that some of the bus shelter locations that we're prioritizing in this budget are indeed some of our most frequently used bus shelters? I think it's important for members of the council to recognize not just the dollar amount, but the impact and the number of individuals that are impacted by some of these things. And I know a number, particularly the Holton, New Hampshire Avenue bus shelter is one of the most frequently used bus shelters in the city. So making sure that those bus shelters, once we're kind of open again, provide safe refuge for a large number of users, bus riders in the city, I think is important. So I just want to kind of make sure that we're not just looking at the SIP projects just from the perspective of a dollar amount, but the actual impact that some of these items may have on a large number of residents in the city. Also, I know Councilmember Kostick talked about that $100,000, and that's another area where what we're talking about is some traffic calming in some places where residents have struggled. We've had a child hit. It's been really, really hectic in the area in Ward 6 with Purple Line construction. And Purple Line construction has not stopped because of COVID. It's still happening. And so whatever we can do to make sure that, again, once we're open again, that residents are now not going to have to wait for some prolonged period of time, potentially another year's worth of construction before they're able to get the necessary pumps. So I do have a question about public art, and I know I feel like I've become one of those people that picks on public art sometimes. But I wonder, are there some ways in which staff can leverage grant funds for things like public art, and even, you know, to a lesser degree, some of our public land management efforts? I recognize what was said previously is that usually public art is one of the first things to kind of get the axe during tight times, but I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about the feasibility of kind of shifting our thinking around some of these more discretionary programs away from, you know, making them hard, fast line items in the budget to maybe diverting staff time more towards trying to acquire larger grants to have like multi-year type art projects in the city, if that makes sense. Or they may not be available. That's why I'm kind of posing the question.
Well, I will, we may need to get some information from our arts coordinator. Ross Grisby may know the answer to that as well. But I will say that, you know, I think that it is in some respects a problem to just have a line item for art, because it is easy to kind of pick on. And in fact, it's usually done in conjunction with some other effort, so that, in my view, a lot of public works projects should have art as a component. And so it's not necessarily a separate item that just like, okay, I don't want a sculpture. It's more, you know, what does the whole project look like and how does that function? And so there's that. I do think that it's, you know, I mean, I would like to see with this pandemic, the same kind of thing, like a works project administration, where you're actually funding artists to do work as an employment activity. And we certainly have been using some funds to use art to get people to buy food from our restaurants. So with the Chalk Riot program. So, you know, trying where we can to like leverage it as a part of some other efforts. Ms. Grisby, do you want to speak a little bit to the possibility of larger grant funds? I don't know if we have an answer to that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I wanted to mention that we have applied for some grants and have received indication that we are on the list. We don't have a confirmed award yet. I think it's the Maryland Council on the Arts. The interesting thing about it is that the amount of the grant is predicated on the amount that the jurisdiction sets aside for public art. And so the public art budget got cut last year, and so it's based on a smaller amount that we're eligible for. They have a complex formula. We have also thought a lot about folding art into other projects. For instance, the bus shelters on Flower Avenue. The space is small for a conventional standard bus shelter. So it's not an option to just use the ones from Signal, which we have elsewhere in the city, and plop in there. And so we've talked a lot about how to do a bare bones shelter and augment with art that would make it interesting, and or even an artistic designed shelter. There's a time frame and you know, logistical complexities of how to design and then fabricate, but that's definitely been part of our internal discussions. I think it makes a lot of sense to combine art with ongoing projects that we do in all kinds of other areas, but especially public works is the natural fit. And I think also with the public space, that that art is an amenity, just as benches are, and we think about those together as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's helpful, and that's something that I know that we've all chatted about offline. I think, as the city manager mentioned, the Chalk Riot project is a really good example of how to use art to promote business. And I would definitely encourage us to kind of think of ways to kind of increase those synergies. And I'm still noodling over where we may find resources, and, you know, things like arts and festivals and things, you know, they feel great, but right now it may not be the best time. But I don't want it in any way to imply that there isn't a desire for that work to continue. It just needs to perhaps continue in a different form. So definitely look forward to having additional conversations as we talk through reconciliation items on ways to kind of see some connections between different line items in order to do a little bit of the work that we think are important, but not perhaps spend as much money on them. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I think I think there's a couple more questions, but we can also move into talking about our reconciliation list and begin. I know Councilmember Kovar has thrown out a couple of things that he wants to consider. I'd like to put out that I'd like to add to the reconciliation list as a cut in this year's budget the money that is currently in there for the community survey and focus groups. That would be $80,000.
I think it's 60,000.
I thought it was 60 for the survey and 20 for the focus groups, but we can double check.
That may be. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And it might be that we go back and we look and, I think the focus groups are also a good way of getting community feedback. And we're constantly talking about looking at other ways of doing community engagement. So as we're going through the next couple of weeks, we may decide to just cut the survey part and keep the focus groups for some other community type engagement or input process. So we can just come back to that. But I just wanted to add that to the list as we're moving forward, just to say that, I think it's, as a survey researcher by profession, it may seem odd that that's the first thing I'm suggesting to cut, but I think we have had very useful information in the past, and I think just going into this fiscal year, given all the change and everything else that's happening, putting it off for another year until we see things stabilize would be useful. The other things I'd like to see, and I don't have amounts yet, but these would be sort of potential additions, is last week we were told in the current budget we have $20,000 in the mini grants to businesses. It's a new program that will make it permanent moving forward. And the emergency fund, both of those items, I just want to put on there. I don't have a dollar amount yet, but I'd like to have council consider adding additional funds to both of those as we're going through this process. I just want those as a placeholder for now. And then the other thing, as I mentioned before, that I'm kind of keeping a list of things that I want to have us check back. I'd like to see kept in the budget, but check back after the first quarter of the year is the sidewalk money and the land management money as well. And actually I was going to add, as Councilman Kostick was adding in the conversation we had regarding the $25,000 for the facade money as well. So those are three areas that I'm starting to think about. I'm not going to propose that they be cut from the budget, but I'd like to have a running list of things that we check in during the first quarter of the year. So that's all I have so far on my list. I see Councilman Kovar's hand is up.
Thank you. I had a few other questions, and these could lead, I suppose, to reconciliation ideas, but they're questions for the city manager. I'm not sure that, I think the complete answers may not be available tonight, but I'll put them out there and you can let me know. And one, and I don't think anyone has the answer for this, but we need to take a stab at it, or more than a stab, an educated stab at it at some point, is to have projections on what we think, for example, will happen with the hotel motel tax, tax duplication. I think I saw something from you recently about that, and whether the county will give us the amount that we're anticipating, and just what we think about each of those potential sources of revenue that make up our budget. And so I don't know if you can say anything about that now, but obviously as we get closer to the point when we're ready to start finalizing things, it would be helpful to have whatever we can have on that.
Thank you. I think I'll be able to get a little bit more specific on some of the items that are in our revenue sources. The hotel motel and some of the amusements and that kind of thing. They're not large contributors to our revenue, but I think I can come up with some estimates about what we would actually get. I think the biggest hit has to do at this moment with recreation revenue. I'd like to speak to that for a moment. But the things that are the larger components of revenue, to me, do not look like they would be significantly affected for FY21. I think it's the years after that that we'll see more significant impacts. And so that's part of what I'll lay out for you in terms of what that might mean in terms of property tax, income tax, and interjurisdictional revenue. I want to speak for just a moment, if I may, about recreation. As we talk about the getting back to normal, you know, when we've talked about what's going on in the city business right now, we're obviously have our police, our public works, our outreach to people who are having economic issues and businesses. I think the next big phase is going to be on childcare services and what happens to get people back to work and where do their kids go. And so one of the things that I think is going to be a major issue is how do we gear up to be providing childcare services if necessary, as you know, the testing gets done and some folks start to go back to work. It may be that our most crucial workers are rec staff, and you know, we may need different or augmented rec staff to be dealing with the medical issues and checking and things that might come with that. So part of what I'm looking at is we may not be getting the revenue from the rec department, but we may have some expenses for the rec department coming up in FY21 that are really different. And so part of what I've been trying to get my head around and talking with the different folks in the different professional associations and the other chief administrative officers is what does that might look like and what impacts it might have on us. So that's another piece as I try to get you information. You know, some of the things that we've traditionally had in terms of revenues and expenses may change in the coming year.
Right, I think.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to add to what the city manager was talking about is that on the calls that I was on last week, as I've mentioned, I'm on weekly calls, checking in with at the county level and at the state level with some of the secretaries and officers and staff from the governor's office. And one of the things that they did talk a great deal about was the contact tracing and who would be the people in a community who may be doing those jobs. And they did talk about, you know, like school nurses as well as librarians and other people who, you know, might be doing that type of work. So I think just to follow on what Ms. Ledlow was saying, that in the future, our rec staff, our librarian staff, those key staff people who know, especially with the young people in our community and can help with the contact tracing, may have this as part of their jobs now. And this may be a whole new world we're looking at in terms of our recreation staff, the job they're doing and everything.
So I appreciate that. And I would just say in terms of the projections, I mean, obviously what we have to think about is even on the income tax piece that we get, I understand why you would say that may be potentially wouldn't be felt till the following year because that's when income taxes are paid. On the other hand, there might be some delays, further delays this year. And so it's possible that could start to come into play this year. And even if it is next year, we still have to plan so that we don't set ourselves up for a worse budget the following year. A couple other questions I had just in terms of timing, and this part seems real awkward to me because we're here doing our budget more or less at the same time that the county is doing its budget. Maybe they're just slightly behind us. And so we're in some ways, we might have hints, or even more than hints, but we're not going to know for sure what they'll do until they do it. And they could be adjusting it right up until the last minute, same as us. So some of the questions are, you know, when do we think what do we think the timing is when the county might know from the county what they're giving us, and then monies, we may get monies more directly either from the next federal legislation, and I know we're advocating for that, but also we might get some of the pass through from the bills that have already passed if the state and the county give it to us. So at this point, I don't think we have any idea, but it would be really helpful to kind of understand as we pass our budget what we should even think about those things. I'm not expecting you to give that answer now, but whatever the best intelligence is. And then I just have two other things I wanted to mention in terms of staffing. So I think I asked you this in an email, but so for the proposed new FTEs, it's slightly under 2, but the net is not the same as the number because in at least one or maybe 2 of those cases, that involves changing from one position to another. So just to know what the, again, not for tonight, but what the total increase in budget is for the new FTEs, which is something less than 2. And then the last thing is, and I don't know how this fits in, but so there are unfilled positions and then there are potential staff COLA payments. And you're also involved with the labor negotiations, and that's been put off for a while. So how do all those things intersect? Because I can imagine us saying sort of in the same way that the mayor said, and I've said, and others have said about not spending certain money until we have a better idea, certain unfilled positions that maybe are important as all of ours are, but maybe not critical to life and safety. We might wait longer than usual to see what we're going to do, but how does it all fit in with the negotiations? That's what I can't quite see at this point.
Well, I think all of the...
That's my last question too.
Do you want to ask another question first?
No, that's my last question.
Oh, okay.
Believe it or not.
That's fine. So I think all of what you've addressed has to do with flexibility. And so I advocate for not having, I mean, I think there has to be some cuts to the tax rate. I mean, I think that's part of what gets discussed from what I proposed. I don't want it to be cut too much, or I don't want too many of these things to be cut while we're still trying to figure out some of the details. But I do appreciate and follow myself this idea of kind of holding off, not filling some things, not spending some things while we learn more information. And I think that's the right way we have to go forward. I think we're not just filling positions left and right. There's a couple key ones that needed to get filled. It's very awkward to know even how to bring somebody on board when you're working remotely or doing these other situations. Nevertheless, so there's some things that I think we just keep open a little bit. There's other things I would like to get the people in. I think all of the department heads are in the same boat, that they're being very careful about not wanting to spend something unless it looks like it's really important to spend right away. Everybody knows to be careful, to consult with others while we go through this. We do have conversations frequently with the county to make sure that there's not some surprises that come up in budgets. We have had in the past last minute changes by the county that fortunately have always been positive. We got some extra money that we didn't know about. One year, which was between first and second budget readings. That was a pain for us to do the ordinance change, but it was a grant that we received that was really needed. So we will watch those kinds of things, but I think we are going to have a situation where we'll have to check in quarterly through the coming year and have a better sense for the following year about what gets proposed.
And in terms of the labor negotiations, I mean, is there anything that you can say about that, or?
I think that, the way that labor negotiations work is that, I consult with council before we have those discussions, and I will do that. The various folks know that we're in a pandemic and have economic issues, and they're looking at that as well as we are. I will say the folks here are reasonable, and we will be trying jointly to figure out what that does.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Councilman DeBala?
Thank you. One question I didn't ask before as clearly as I could have, along the lines of what's affected, what's not. For public works projects, some things are moving forward, some things are slowing down, some things are not going to happen at all. Can we, in terms of the projects that are scheduled and the funds that are available this year, next year, and are proposed for next year, what is the Public Works Director's thinking about the ability to spend money? So we talked about recreation, we talked about some of the facade improvements and some other programs, but actually we haven't talked about the timing of work on the Public Works programs.
Let's see, I'm unmuted, sorry about that. Well, so far, most of, certainly for contractual services, those companies are considered essential. So they've been active and engaged. In particular, I could point to Flower Avenue, as well as all the utility work that's taking place around our city. So that's still going on as well. All but 3 Public Works employees are on site every day, working in the field. So we haven't had any slowdown in terms of our regular day-to-day work. So at this point, it's not obvious that we'll have any difficulty unless something drastically changes. The type of contractual work that we're doing seems to be able to continue. And it's just, sometimes it's a matter of staff oversight, but again, because our construction manager is on site as well as myself, the city engineer is telecommuting, so we have to cover his work, but most of it we're able to take care of in the field through staff that are here.
Okay. All right, Councilman Kostick.
Thank you. Yes, so just 2, it's getting late, so just 2 kind of quick things. One is I'm increasingly getting a little concerned about our budget for next year, hearing that it looks like there are, I mean, we were talking about the CIP expenditures. It looks like we're likely to be hit with changes in revenue, decreases in revenue, probably in the next cycle more than in this cycle. I'm just wondering sort of how we're setting ourselves up for that and what we need to be doing to protect against that.
Thank you. I mean, it's a critical issue. I think I don't know the answer to that yet, and I think that's part of what we'll have to be checking over the quarters. I think the biggest issue will be, what happens with the federal response. So whether it's direct payments, whether it's helping our businesses, whether it's paying a good amount of income to residents, that all makes a real difference about what might happen for FY22. The other thing that's important is that we have to see a little bit more to know the magnitude of any cuts or things that we might need to do in FY22. And it's not useful to make cuts when you don't know if they're the right type of cuts. I want to be cautious and not add lots of things, and you see that here. But in terms of the kinds of cuts, either there may be big cuts or little cuts, and that really depends on what we start seeing over the next probably 4 to 6 months to see what the reaction is. I think it's just going to be a lot of communication back and forth, and I've got one more budget to prepare here. I don't want it to be the worst budget. I want to be careful that we're good stewards of the money now and fiscally responsible for FY22 and for future years. Until we see what happens, I think particularly with the federal payments and that structure, I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think I'm supportive of some of the discussions we've had tonight about the idea of keeping some flexibility and perhaps keeping some items on hold as we sort of see how things are shifting and how things are going in the coming year. I really think that makes a lot of sense. The mayor mentioned wanting to look into increasing some of the funding for things like the emergency assistance fund, which is something I would like to also investigate. I don't have specific numbers right now, but a few things I was sort of thinking of in terms of reconciliation were getting some more information about Independence Day and the likelihood of that happening or not happening, and or happening in a severely diminished capacity. So looking at the funding, potentially a funding change for that, as well as the Folk Festival. And I know on Wednesday we're hearing more from the Council Compensation Commission, but I think probably I would be interested in looking at a decrease in the proposed wages and fringe that has been proposed. And
for council or for everybody?
For council, yes, I'm sorry, yes, for council. And then I'd like to hear a little more next week on the police retirement plan contribution and the thinking with regard to the contribution, the going above the it's hard to say.
You had it right the first time.
The recommended amount. And then finally, as Councilmember Kovar suggested, I'm interested in hearing a little more about the recommended staffing increases, particularly in IT.
Okay. Thanks very much. And I'll just note that I have put out inquiries to both the Independence Day Committee and the Folk Festival Committee about what their plans are, their options, what are they considering. I have not yet, but I intend on reaching out to the actuaries about the police retirement contribution. Is it something that would be more helpful because of the situation we're in, or less helpful? What does that look like? And I hope to have that answer back by next week.
Councilman Dabala, is your hand up again? No, okay.
No.
All right, not seeing any other questions. Does the city manager have anything else for us this evening?
No, I appreciate the questions that I get. It was a little bit ping-pongy today. I got a lot of emails today. I appreciate the deputy city managers compiling these questions so that they can come back in a more organized fashion for you to see the answers. Also, I'll have the reconciliation list with kind of plopping in some of these things, and maybe, you know, over in the next discussions, getting a little more specific about numbers and what that looks like, so that you have that to work with. I really appreciate all of the ideas that I've been hearing from council, and the collaborative approach about how do we make this budget work in this time. I think this is not easy for any of us, and we're all, and I just appreciate that we all want to do the right thing. So thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you, and thank you for all your work. And we are adjourned for this evening, and we'll be back on Wednesday. So good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.